Welcome back. I'm Gila Ross, author of Living Beautifully and host of the Parlight podcast, where we share short, relatable ideas to impact and upgrade your everyday life. Welcome, everyone. We're going to be spending the next few weeks talking about friendships. And we're going to start off this week with the art of building friendships, whether it's new ones or cultivating old ones. Before we even jump into it, let's talk a little bit about the qualities we look for in friends. What are, like, if you had to think of like 3, 4, 5 qualities you're looking for in a friend, what would they be?
Loyalty, kindness,
Safety, common background and interests.
trustworthy.
Yeah. On Monday, someone put it this way. She says, you don't want to tell your friend something and then hear all about it in shul. So trustworthiness is an
Big.
important one. So we've got some ideas. Before we even start looking into how we build those friendships and cultivate those connections, let's talk about how important is it? I think it's important for us to know before we actually delve into it, because you don't yet know what I'm going to teach you about how to build it. So let's start with sort of exploring how important do you think it is to have friends?
Extremely.
If you've ever gone through a difficult time and not had someone there with you, you understand how important it is to have
Yeah,
people, because even like you can get through anything if there's someone standing next to you to get through it. But if you're doing it alone, it's virtually, it feels impossible. Like every step feels like the hardest step you could possibly take.
well, also it's somebody to like, I'm just thinking of something my friend said to me yesterday, like, wow, like you have so much resilience and strength, and it's kind of like a mirror to myself. And I like, oh yeah, that she sees me that way. That's true.
Love it. It's like, because she sees you that way, now you can see that in yourself as well. Right? So I'll share with you a couple of Jewish ideas about that. And one is, there's a story of a rabbi in the Talmud called Choni HaMagel. So why was he called Choni HaMagel? Is because Magel means a circle. There was once a drought in Israel, and all the Jews were praying for rain, but there was still no rain. So what did Choni HaMagel do? Is he went out, he drew a circle on the ground, he stood in the circle, and he said to God, God, I'm not leaving this circle until it starts raining. Yes, it's a little bit like bold, right? There's a word for it, I think, in Yiddish called chutzpah, right? So it started to drizzle with rain. It gets better, right? So what does Choni HaMagel say? He says to God, this isn't what I meant when I said rain. I mean real rain that nourishes and helps things grow. And so it started to rain and rain and rain, and it didn't stop raining. And obviously too much rain can be as problematic as not enough rain. So he gets back in the circle. He tells God, I'm not getting out of the circle until you give us rain, which is going to nourish us and not going to be destructive. Did in fact give him rain, give not him but all of the people rain. And I see the laughter around the room, and I related to myself, right? Like it's kind of like some of you may know I have young kids as well, right? So my little one's 4, I've got a 6-year-old, and I can imagine them like standing in the car and saying, I'm not getting out of the car until you give me a cookie. And when you put it in that context, and the rabbis actually talk about this, they debate, like, was it okay what he did, or was it too much? And they said, but if it would have been anyone else, it would have been chutzpah, right? It would have been obstinate. But because it was Choni HaMagel, and he had that relationship with God, and also he wasn't doing it because he wanted a cookie for himself, right? He was doing it because he cared about the Jewish people, and he wanted them to have the nourishment. And that's why for him it was okay. And we see that it was okay because God responded by giving the Israel rain that it needed, and the famine ended. So this is a snapshot of who he was. The Talmud tells a story of that he was there's a phrase in Tehillim that talks about someone who sleeps for about 70 years, and he couldn't understand that. How can it be that someone sleeps for 70 years? Like it's like it doesn't make sense. So what happened is he actually fell asleep, and he slept for 70 years. And he woke
This
up.
guy that,
Yeah, it's
Okay.
Tony Hamargo. He woke up and he was walking around, and what had happened is before he fell asleep, he saw someone planting a carob tree, and he had said to that person, "How long does it take to grow?" And he says, "About 70 years." He says, "You're not gonna be around when it grows. Why are you doing it?" He says, "I'm planting for my descendants to have it after me." So he wakes up from his nap. He doesn't know how long he's napped, and he sees this carob tree in full bloom. He says to the person he's like, "Hold on a second, like, are you the person that I spoke to?" He's like, no, that was my grandfather, like 70 years. That's a long time. And as he walks around, like he goes into the Beit Midrash, and he talks to them, and he realizes that none of his peers are around anymore. Right, in 70 years, the two generations have passed. And it was such a lonely experience for him that he actually died. And the Talmud says that this is how we understand the phrase of "give me friends or give me death," right? That friendship, companionship is so important. And we actually see this, I think, nowadays. I believe the World Health Organization says that the biggest threat to our health nowadays, does anyone know what it is? The epidemic is loneliness. We live in a generation where we have running water, we have food, we have healthcare, whatever, right? Whether we like the healthcare or not. And yet the biggest threat to our health is loneliness. So we actually see that companionship, friendship is vitally important, and not just any friendship that's important, but the right type of friendships. What do I mean by that? So again, this is from Proverbs. It says that he that walks with wise men shall be wise, but a companion of fools shall suffer harm. What does that sound like to you?
you're influenced by the people that you're with.
Right, we're influenced by the people we're around, right? So if you have good friends, then that's good for us. And if you have friends that are not good for us, that's not good for us. Has anyone ever experienced that?
I actually have a good example. A little over a year ago, I was approached about joining this brokerage, and before that I was on my own. So I was surrounded by myself and I was not good company. I joined a brokerage. The 10 women that I'm surrounded by the most are the most positive, affirming,
Wow.
cheerlead type people. And it's changed like the trajectory of like everything. It's changed my outlook on everything. Just being surrounded by these people who are there to uplift everyone else around them.
That's
Amazing.
great.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. All right. So what is the role of a good friend? Good friend, what do they bring to our life that changes things for us? So they help us grow. Yes. Okay. And how do they help us grow? You're 100% right that we're looking for really, yes, a friend is there for fun, friendship. And if we're lucky enough, we have one or two or a few of those really good friends that really help us grow in life, right? So there's actually 3 different ways that these friends can help us grow. Can anyone guess any of them? They tell us what we need to hear, not
Right.
what we want to hear.
Yes.
Right? And I may have shared this story before, but years ago when we were living in Vancouver, and my oldest was 12 at the time. He was almost bar mitzvah, so he was going to start high school in Vancouver. They start high school in 8th grade, and the community was such that there was going to be one other kid going into the religious high school with him. So we were left with a dilemma. Right? So what do we do? Thank God we were doing well in our jobs. We were settled in the community. My son wasn't thriving, but he was 12. And, is he not thriving because he's 12? Is he not thriving because of his personality? Is he not thriving because of the environment he's in? Like, who knows? So what did we do is we went to our rabbi and we said to him, look, this is our dilemma. We have, thank God, a job, we have financial stability. We're settled in the community. Son's starting high school with one other kid, and it's not a great situation for him. And we've been looking at different positions, and every other position that came up had significant disadvantages. So like one of them was like hours of driving to school every day. Another one of them, it was a great community, but on Shabbat there would be no peers for my kids to play with.
With it in different
In
locations?
different locations,
Okay.
yeah. So all entailed moving out of Vancouver.
Okay.
So our rabbi said, it's beyond my pay grade, go ask someone else. So we actually went to Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky, who's one of the leading rabbis of the generation nowadays, and we asked him the question. Now, he was very hard to get hold of, so it happened to be that my husband got hold of him one day while I was out, and he went through the situation with him and explained, you know, there's this option, there's that option. And it was my husband later told me what happened, and it was really beautiful to kind of hear how someone who is a leader responds to a question like that, because he didn't really give just listened, and he didn't really comment on all the different options that it was. And then out of the blue, like my husband saw that he wasn't really getting a response, like saying like, yeah, you should move there, and then you should stay there. And he's out of the blue, my husband was like, we could move back to the UK, we could move back to Manchester. So we had interviewed in Manchester, but there were no jobs in our field. And my husband was like, and he says, that's a great idea.
Have I said this?
The rabbi said that's a great idea, not me, right? So anyway, so my husband's like, but we don't have jobs, we may have to go into a different field. And he says, you know what, like it's a great idea. The reasoning behind his thing was, he says, you don't want to take a child who's about to be a teenager in an environment that's not ideal, right? Like that, then he's not going to be happy, right? A kid has to be happy. You know, that's the foundation, and then they can learn and they can do all the other things, the values that we're trying to teach them. But you have to give him a good start. You can't. So that was his premise behind it. So I come home and my husband tells me about this conversation, and I'm like, that wasn't what I wanted to hear. So I remember reaching out to a friend of mine at the time, and I said to her, I said, look, in Jewish law, when you ask a rabbi a halachic question, you have to listen, right? You ask the rabbi, is this kosher? He tells you yes or no, you have to listen to that. But this wasn't a halachic question, it wasn't Jewish law, it was life advice, right? So I said to her, I said, I'm not bound by it, right? So this is how I know she's a good friend. So she turned around to me and she said to me, Gira, you asked because you didn't know what to do. And I thought about what she said, and I thought she's so right? She could have easily said to me like, oh, you're right, you know, you don't, like, moving is a big deal, like you don't have to move, right? There's so many, like, you know, fool yourself into thinking all sorts of things when you have to push yourself outside of your comfort zone. So, but she turned around to me, she's like, no, you asked because you didn't know what to do. And I spent a few days thinking about it, and eventually I came around to understanding that she's right. And he was right. And we did end up relocating our family, but it's just that relationship that you can have with someone else where we're open to hearing the truth, and where they're open to kind of telling us what we actually need to hear, not just what we want to hear, is just priceless, because it helps us. We all have a blind spot, right? We all have areas where we're blinded by ourselves. So if we can have someone in our lives that can tell us that is something that really helps us move forward in life. Any other things that a good friend kind of brings in, adds into our life?
Well, perspective, but I don't know if it goes along with what you just said, but literally I called a friend on the way home from work today because like something at work got me like all riled up, and I needed this friend to like give me perspective. I'm like, am I just being sensitive? Is my ego getting involved? Like I needed her outside opinion and her looking into my life and my situation to tell me if it was my ego or was my thinking valid.
Yeah.
And I think that's a beautiful idea, and I think that's partly this, but also partly like someone that we can bounce ideas off, right? Because sometimes it's perspective on ourselves, but sometimes it's perspective on something we learned or an idea we heard. So and a friend that you can bounce ideas off, you can sort of share, you know, meaningful conversations. It helps us deepen our understanding of concepts, and it helps propel us forward. Anything else that a good friend can give us when we're talking about vulnerability and you know, is we want someone who's going to be discreet, right? I think that's kind of one of the things we discussed when we spoke about the qualities. Someone who's going to be discreet so that we can share things with and who can give us advice. Right, that we can, so those are really like the three roles of a friend, right? Like someone that we can bounce ideas off, it helps us deepen our understanding, someone who can be honest with us, give us constructive criticism when we need it, and someone who's discreet and we can be, you know, and it's going to be confidential and we can share things and they can give us advice.
You can trust them.
We can trust them. All right, now let's talk about how we actually make those friendships. So I'm going to start with something that comes from Kierkegaard, and it's actually in my book as well. So if you've read my book, if you think you may have heard this before, but Kierkegaard talks about the importance of having a friend, and it uses a very strange terminology for it. It says "Knei lecha haver," and does anyone know what the word "knei" means?
Get yourself.
It's to acquire, it's to buy.
Okay.
It's the language of acquisition. If anything's going to be offensive, that might be offensive, right? Oh, I want to be your friend. You know, well, I'll pay you $50. What does it mean? What does it mean? Acquire for yourself a friend.
Make an effort to form a friendship.
Exactly. It's saying that friendship is so important that we have to invest in it. It's an investment. Okay, we'll talk about what that investment looks like in a moment, but the first thing we have to understand is that, and I think sometimes we struggle with this because we think that, you know, friends should just be friends, easy, right? The first thing we have to understand as adults is that we have to invest in our friendships. We have to invest in new friendships and we have to invest in our old friendships as well. Now, what does that investment look like? For different people, it looks like different things, right? The first thing I think nowadays, what we really, let me ask you before I start saying anything, what do you think what do we have to invest in friendships? What do we have to invest? What do you think?
Time.
Time, exactly. Right, and I think it's something that we live in the digital age, and it's so quick to, you know, like if you're on social media, to press a like or whatever, or to drop a happy birthday when it's someone else's birthday, or and it, you know what? I hate to break it to you, it's not the same as real friendships. You have to invest time. You have to pick up the phone and speak to someone. You have to get together. You have to come out to a class like this or something like that and talk to people and connect with them and go for a walk or go for a coffee. And I think sometimes, so often, it's like the last thing that we do. We'll do X, Y, Z. We'll do everything that we need to do on our list. And like friends, when we have time to. I saw a meme of like where it had like two elderly women on it, and it said underneath it, me and my friends getting together after we've done everything on our to-do. Like the idea that, you know, in 20 years time we'll get together or so. And if we don't have the idea that, hold on a second, this is something that is important, then we often don't invest that time. So the first thing we have to understand is that we have to invest our time into friendships. Anything else we have to invest?
Emotional vulnerabilities.
Emotional vulnerability, yeah. And I'm gonna widen that as well too, because it's about being vulnerable, and it's like pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone. Like I was speaking to someone today actually, and she was mentioning to me that she's gone through a difficult life situation and she's living somewhere and she doesn't have so many friends, and she said something like, you know, I really should go to this place, but it's hard. And that's exactly, I think, the point. And there's no judgment, like I totally get how hard it can be. However, that pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone is what's important when it comes to friendship. Yeah, like maybe you need to go somewhere where you wouldn't necessarily go, right? Your friend says to you, come, you know, will you come out and do X, Y, Z for you with me, and you hate what that thing, but right. I'll use an example, right? A friend comes and says, do you want to go shopping? And like, to me, that's like, that sounds awful, right? Like, but you know what? Like, maybe it's more important to spend time with a friend than it is.
Yeah.
Whatever, you know, and maybe once she'll go, I don't know, somewhere where you want to go and she doesn't want to go. But the idea that you're or you're going to a place where you know that you can meet people. There was someone that was telling me that she was telling us that when she moved to Denver from somewhere else. And when she moved here, it was hard for her. It's hard to move to a new place. And she pushed herself to go to every single event just to meet people. That is the type of thing that you have to kind of push yourself out of your comfort zone. And whether that's, in terms of physically where you're going to, or in terms of emotional vulnerability, opening up to a friend. And again, it has to be done bit by bit, because you want to make sure you're opening up to people that are safe to open up to. So you do a little bit, and if that's safe and you don't hear about it in shul, then you can open up a little bit more, right? If you do, then maybe not, right? So, but it has to be done in a safe way. But that sort of pushing yourself out is also it's something that we have to invest in order to make and maintain our friends. And it's also about compromising as well, right? Again, it's sometimes like, if your friend wants to do something and it's not your favorite thing to do, but maybe do it because it's more important to be there for each other, right?
Or the time isn't exactly convenient.
Yeah. And it's interesting because like we all said, and I think this is what Julie said as well, we all said like, we want someone who's there for us, right? So that means also having to be there for our friends as well. Anything else? Anyone?
I think that priority, making the friend a priority, and that it needs to go both ways.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to share something that I think is incredibly important. Friendships, the truth is for all relationships, but for friendships as well. And this is also from Pirkei, and it's called Don Lekaf, right? Which means judging other people favorably, right? Giving other people the generous, the most generous interpretation of what they're doing. And I think there's important to know exactly to know a little bit about it, right? What does Jewish law expect when it tells us to judge other people favorably? If my friend is always late, do I have to assume that every single time she's late, she has a really good excuse?
No.
Okay, so there's 3 different categories of people, right? For Jewish law differentiates between 3 different categories of people when it comes to Dam Kasachut. There's someone that's a good person, someone who's an average person, and someone who's an evil person, a bad person, right? Now, this is according to the action that you're doing, right? So let's just take something like timekeeping. A good person is someone who more or less is always on time, right? Person is probably someone that sometimes is, sometimes isn't, or someone that you don't necessarily know. Right, you're just kind of meeting them. And a bad person when it comes to this is someone who's always late, or pretty much always late, right? So when it's a good person, you have to, Jewish law says you have to give them the benefit of the doubt, right? They're usually on time, they come late, you have to give them a generous interpretation. Maybe the dishwasher flooded as they were walking out the door, right? Or something happened, that thing. If it's an average person, they're sometimes late, they're sometimes not. You don't have to, but it's considered a good thing to give them the benefit of the doubt. And if it's a bad person, then you have to be cautious, right? If it's someone, and obviously I'm using the timekeeping example, which is a pretty, do you not get what that means? Like,
Yeah. It's
neutral.
not loaded.
Yeah, it's a pretty neutral example, but there could be, talk about keeping confidences, for example. If you have someone who always keeps you confident, and then for some reason something happens and she doesn't keep you confident, you have to give them the benefit of the doubt, right? And then you can be curious, you can speak to her or him and say what happened, right? But the first reaction has to be one of, let me give them the benefit of the doubt. If they're an average person, you don't know. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Then it's praiseworthy. It's a good thing to give them the benefit of the doubt. Again, you can go and you can talk to the person and ask them what happened, etc. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just when we give them the most generous interpretation, the way we ask them is different, right? We're not jumping down the throat and saying, I can't believe you kept me waiting a half an hour again, right? And if they did, and if it's something that's consistent, we don't have to give them the benefit of the doubt. And in fact, we're supposed to be cautious, right? Don't tell them something, right? Or if you're going to be late, expect them to be late if they're going to be. And In fact, the Talmud tells, now I want to illustrate how important this trait is. The Talmud illustrates this point with a story, and it says there was a worker who worked for his employer for 3 years, and it came to before Yom Kippur, and it was the end of his, he was about to go home, so he went to his employer and he said to him, "I've worked for you for 3 years, can you pay me, please?" And he says, "I'm really sorry, I don't have money to pay you." So he says, "Okay, can you give me a piece of your land then?" Right? He was an agricultural worker, and he says, "I'm really sorry, I don't have any land to give you." So he says, "Okay, can you give me some produce then?" And he says, "I'm really sorry, I don't have any produce to give you."
Oh, yeah.
And he says, "At least can you give me some pillows and blankets?" Maybe that way. He says, "I'm really sorry, I don't have any pillows and blankets to give you." So the worker, brokenhearted, empty-handed, goes home to his family. After the holidays, the employer shows up at his house with all the money that he owed him, plus 2 donkeys laden with delicacies for his family as a treat. And he says to the employer says to him, "Tell me, what did you think when I told you I had no money?" He said, I assumed that you had lent out your money and you couldn't pay me back." And then he says, "And what did you think when I told you that I had no land?" He says, "The same thing. I assumed that you maybe had lent out your land and you didn't give it to me." So he says, "Okay, and what did you think when I told you that I had no produce that I could give you?" So he said, "I thought to myself, you probably haven't given 10% of your produce yet, and therefore you couldn't give it." And you're laughing because you're thinking this guy's naive and far-fetched. And then he says, "What did you think when I told you that I couldn't even give you pillows or blankets?" He says, "I assumed that you had consecrated some of your possessions to the temple." Now, that in Jewish law, there's a thing called, in the time when we had the temple, where someone would dedicate some of their possessions and they couldn't use anything until they had given it. So I assume that's what happened. And the employer was like amazed. He says, "That's exactly what happened," right? And the Talmud tells a story, but there are stories these days where you give someone the benefit of the doubt and it might seem like far-fetched, and it actually ends up being the true story. Has anyone ever had that example where you've jumped to conclusions and you were wrong, or you've given someone the benefit of the doubt and it ended up being...
I've jumped to conclusions and then been wrong a lot of times.
Yes, like, how could you not have taken the trash out? And like,
Oh.
they didn't hear you. Like, it happens all the time, and that's why it's such, because so much of the conflict and the strife starts when we don't give people the benefit of the doubt. So when we can sort of just like slow down and give people the benefit of the doubt, that is such a valuable tool for our relationship. And it goes one step further as well. And again, we see this from Pirkei Avot, where it says "Dam et kol ha'adam," right? Now the words in Hebrew literally mean judge the whole person. And now really the wording should be judge all people. So it should be kol adam, all people, but it says kol ha'adam, the whole person. Why? Because it's teaching us something important. It's teaching us that everyone has goods and everyone has bads. When it comes to our bless you. When it comes to our friends, when it comes to people that we're in relationships, judge the whole person. Yes, they're a person who's always late. Okay. But they're possibly also the person that will drop anything and come when you need them because they have no sense of time, right? The flip side of it. Or they're a spontaneous, fun friend, right? Everyone, and if you can't find the good in the other person, then it's usually because we haven't looked hard enough. So it's teaching us to judge, to give people their actions the benefit of the doubt, but also when we get upset with them, judge the whole person. And incidentally, it's for ourselves as well. When we get frustrated with ourselves, we also have to remember that there's a lot of good to us as well. Yeah, we have to take accountability for the things that we do wrong. We have to judge our whole persona, right? The good with the bad. We have to remember the good as well as the things that we need to fix on. And I'm gonna end with the short story. We're running out of time, but I'll end with one short story about judging people favorably. So King David, one of the things that he's slightly criticized for is that he sent Uriel into war and then married Uriel's wife Bathsheba, which is a whole complicated story. Why did he do that, etc., which we're not going to go into. But the part of the story that I wanted to focus on is that God sent Nathan the prophet to tell King David off. And what did he do? Nathan went to King David and he told him a story. He told him the story of a rich person and a poor person. He said this rich person had tons and tons of cattle and animals, and the poor person only had one. And the rich person took the cattle from the poor person. And King David's reaction to that was like, oh my goodness, that's terrible. He should be killed. And Nathan turned around to him and said, and explained to him what the story was. You're saying, you have so many wives, and you sent Uriel, who had only one, into battle. Like he was using it as an analogy. And Baal Shem Tov, who was the founder of the Hasidic movement, tells us that the same thing happens to us, is that the way we judge other people is the way that we're judged. And we all want God to be lenient and kind and forgiving to us. And therefore it behooves us to also judge other people like that. So not only is it good for our relationships to give other people the benefit of the doubt, but it's also good for our own spiritual standing with God to give other people the benefit of the doubt. Okay, so we discussed a lot today. So let's just sum up what we did. We spoke about how vitally important it is to have friends, good friends, propel us forward in life. They help us deepen our understanding because we can bounce ideas off them. They're honest with us. They're discreet. We can get advice from them. And we spoke about the idea that in order to build and maintain these friendships, we have to understand it's an investment, right? Whether that's investment of our time, going outside our comfort zone, compromising our personal preferences to accommodate our friends, and also by giving other people the benefit of the doubt. Like when we invest all these kinds of things, that's how we sort of build our friendships.
What are situations where you can say no to a friend, or does that bring up a whole nother discussion?
So next week we're going to look about when things like the title of the class is "But It's Then," right? When things are a little bit rocky, right? When things go wrong with.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. I'd love to hear your feedback, and if you enjoyed this episode, you'll love my book, Living Beautifully: How to Bring Meaning, Joy, and Love into Your Life, based on the timeless wisdom of Pirkei Avot. And please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out. Have a wonderful day.